Okay, then can you explain to me how more secular societies tend to have less crime and less everything and more happiness across the board?
I don't think you can make that. I know
Yeah,
that
I've
they've
never
done,
heard
there's
that.
a series of different studies. No, there is a study I know what you're pointing to, because there is studies that have shown that some of the Northern European societies tend to be very happy. They also have a lot of social safety nets. And so I think that they've shown in those studies it's not directly related to religiosity per se. It's more related to the fact that
No,
they've got a lot of social safety nets. So there's a very
the
strong
social.
welfare system, and the people are very wealthy. So you could probably correlate wealth. In fact, I know you can correlate wealth and income to a person's happiness, and those Northern European societies are wealthy.
I don't think you can because there's still a lot of
Can
a
I
great
bring up?
majority of the people here who are wealthy who are completely and utterly depressed. So I don't see how you can make that correlation.
I,
Joshua?
I actually can make that correlation. If you pull out the world value surveys and you do SPSS or you do a statistical package on them, you can directly correlate happiness to income. I mean, there's lots of studies that have done this. Happiness and income are well correlated. Happiness and the feeling that you have enough income is correlated. One of the problems in the United States is we have huge income inequalities between the wealthy and the poor, and that actually makes people in many levels, most people are in the middle class, so that makes people pretty unhappy, and that's why we are a nation of lots of very depressed people. A lot of people are really depressed.
All right, and hold on one second, Frustrated. Let me let Joshua add something on to the end of that real quick. Go ahead, Joshua, get in there.
Well, I just first of all, I think you're pointing to something, and this is to SJ. I think you're pointing to something by what Jonathan Haidt, I believe he teaches evolutionary psychology. He has said about comparing in the U.S. the difference between income and equality. But I did want to read something to you about the secularization. Actually, two things. It's very short. The secularization thesis came around in 1967 with the scholar, and I want y'all to look this up. His name is Peter Berger. Peter Berger. He just recently died, but he was a professor in sociology. Anyway, he has recounted his belief as of 2008 in an article from First Things called Secularization Falsified. The founder of the secularization thesis wrote an article, it was in February 2008, Secularization Falsified, and he says the churches and Christians growing in the global south, and what we're talking about here is Asia, a place that I've taught myself. I've lived and taught there before in South Korea. South America, Africa, and especially China are seeing enormous Christian explosions. So, while European and American society might possibly be transforming in their understanding of what Christianity is, well, not so in the global south. The other thing I wanted to read is a quote by the British sociologist. Her name is Grace Davies. She's a sociologist. Here's what she says. What the concept of believing without belonging effectively, it's a long one. I'm not going to read it. She talks about a notion called believing without belonging, that they are so entrenched in a Christian mindset from history that they don't necessarily have to go to church. They have the liberalization, the freedom to express a variety of things that aren't necessarily in strict doctrinal conformance to what Christianity fundamentalism is per se, but they're still Christian. When you ask them this in surveys and you ask them a more nuanced question, according to Grace Davies, they are believers without belonging to an official church in the UK.
Let me ask SJ real quick, because SJ, you had mentioned something. You said that you're basically appealing to a utility, that you're saying that if people were more believing, if they were more Christian, they would have accountability. But whatever happened to people like Ted Haggard, Ted Haggard, Jim Baker, Swaggart, all these pastors have been busted. They believed in God, but they had no moral, compunction to not do what they did. The entire Catholic Church scandal, the Jehovah's Witness scandal. Obviously, that's not a fair argument to make. That all of a sudden, if you posit that people are going to believe in God, that they're going to somehow have more moral accountability, because we've seen from demonstrable, overwhelming evidence over the years that's not the case.
Well, actually, that's you bring up a really good point, and I'll be the first to say there's obviously some people who are, you can identify people in both sides who are morally egregious, and so I would say Jim Baker, for example, is a great example. We even have our prosperity preachers. I mean, are they following exactly what Jesus said to do, the prosperity preachers? So we do have. Yeah, you're right. And of course those Catholic priests who did that stuff. I mean, why did I leave the Catholic Church 20 years ago? Is because of those Catholic priests. They've been getting away with it, and it seems like it's not. It's terrible. They're going to be judged more harshly, and they know that if they actually read their Bible. But here's the thing. I'm not saying, and I'll never say this, I'm not saying that atheists are not moral. I think that there are many very moral atheists. There are many atheists who are better parents than I am, for example. They're doing a great job with their kids. I'm not making that claim. I'm just saying that if you take a nation of people, 330 million people here in the United States, you look at a full nation, and you have most people with the view that they'll be held externally accountable, I think that makes a safer society in general. Now, of course, we do have examples on both sides of people doing the wrong things. Like I'll name the prosperity preachers in the Catholic Church, and I can also look at the other side with Stalin and Mao and those people. My point is, I think as a whole, when you take the entire world, you take billions of people on the planet who feel like they're going to be held externally accountable. I think it's just going to make for a safer society in general.
Or they become Buddhist and just be really, mellow and not have a God belief and just realize, hey, don't do bad things to other people, right?
And that actually brings up another.
Remember this. Remember this: Buddhism is not what transformed the world and brought us individual rights and private property. That was Christianity, with its belief in a natural world that could be discoverable by people and find laws.
Yeah, I disagree. Let's keep
discover laws.
That's like saying slavery slavery was good because it gave us the cotton industry. Therefore, we should bring back slavery because it's good for cotton picking. That's the kind of reasoning that you're using. Just because something was advantageous back then for cultural reasons doesn't mean that holds true today. You're arguing from past.
I'm not saying just. Whoa! I'm not saying just advantageous in a temporal way. I'm saying we would not even have individual rights if it wasn't for this Christian mindset that showed that we are created equal in the image of God. You just can't take that for granted.
The Bible to justify slavery at some point. So I mean,
yes, they did use the Bible to justify.
Frustrated.
We're not all. I would like.
Please don't forget the. Please don't forget that the early abolitionist tracts were from the Quakers and from a number of other Christian denominations. This was during the 1830s and 40s and 50s. This is why
we're going to have to mute you. Okay, I'm sorry to have to do that. Okay, but we're going to have to mute you if you can't follow what I'm saying. This is not a free for all. Like, you can't just butt in whenever you want to and say whatever you want to. There's an order to this, and I called on Frustrated Atheist.
All right.
I said your name about 20 different times, so you have to stop when I do that. Otherwise, we're going to mute you. You're not going to win out on that. Okay, let's just understand that right now. All right. I hate when people talk over each other. I want it orderly so that everybody can follow along. And Frustrated Atheist hasn't spoken in a while, so we're going to give him a chance to talk about what has gone up to this point, and then we will give you all the time that you need. All right, Frustrated Atheist.
All right, yeah. So what I was going to say is the fact that we've had slavery happening ever since the Bronze Age and beyond. And all of this has been happening in the presence of religion. And it wasn't until we got until the 1800s where finally someone said, at least here in the States, someone said, here, this is wrong. And someone before that said this was wrong. Now, I'm not saying that either one of them were Christian or atheist. But slavery has been heavily endorsed in the Bible, has been given, it even gives you a whole entire list of what you can and cannot do with a slave, who cannot be slaves, and how long certain slaves can be slaves for, and then of course there's the loophole with those slaves that you can trick them into becoming slaves for the rest of their lives, and all of these other different things. That slavery was not in any way, shape, or form, abolished because Christians said, "Oh, we're all equal." As a matter of fact, there was probably quite a few people who sat there while being God-fearing Christians, sat there and said, "My Bible says that you are below me, and this is why." And they even gave slaves heavily doctored Bibles for just them to have, so that way they know that you must obey your master, and that when your master tells you to do something, you have to do it, and that your master owns you. So this is what you cannot, in any way, shape, or form, say that Christianity has, throughout history, let us know that we're all created equal, because it hasn't.
Okay, now Josh or SJ, you may respond.
I'll let Joshua, because he was about to talk about slavery.
I just wanted to say I'm sorry for earlier. Sorry.
That's all right.
Alvin Schmidt, in his How Christianity Changed the World and How Is God a Moral Monster, they talk specifically about this issue. There are legitimate scholars that go into these issues. There's something called progressive revelation, and that says we, just like science or just like education, with the growth of wisdom and the longer that people have to be in groups and to contemplate these issues and to reflect on theology and the nature of God and human rights. And by the way, it's according to our founders, it was very hard to talk about human rights without also talking about responsibilities. Indeed, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, these anti-federalists against this big government picture of the world, they thought that slavery would eventually go away. But of course it didn't, because of technological innovations. And again, that's because of private property. Something called the Cotton Gin of 1794 actually helped slavery go. There were a lot of compromises in the 1820s with the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 that kept this going, that people did not want to fight this moral fight against slavery and kill it once and for all. So yes, there were some people in the South, most of them did not own slaves, but there were people in the South that thought that they did have a right to secede from the Union. But the Civil War happened because Abraham Lincoln would not let them secede from the Union. And under Jefferson's and Madison's theory, slavery went away by its own if they would have. But be that as it may, it was indeed the Quakers and a number of others that wrote these abolitionist tracts and did much of the work that would abolish slavery. And it was also William Wilberforce in Britain that did this before. In 1807, slavery was abolished in Britain long before America. You see, ideas do have consequences. Slavery has been endemic to society, but with the availability of progressive revelation, that we getting a more sophisticated understanding of rights and who we are and equality, that eventually got rid of slavery. And it's because of Christianity. And this has only happened in the West.
Okay, I think that's fair. I think I want to say something that I think everybody would agree to. I think that we can all agree that and I'll agree with, I think that one of the points that Frustrated Atheist was saying was basically that, we certainly have some moral monsters in our past. We have moral monsters on both sides of the table. You could certainly look to the people who were slave owners who were trying to use the Bible as a means to justify it, and they clearly weren't even reading the Bible and exactly what the inscriptions were